slides think that it's been a week since I saw you, yeah? So then maybe you've forgotten things. So maybe you will have forgotten less than the slides think you will have forgotten. Basically, today we're going to talk about Middle Chinese, and then a little bit towards the end about kind of moving from Middle Chinese to Old Chinese, right? So Middle Chinese is the Cheiyun is early Middle Chinese, and then the rhyme tables like the Yunjing, late Middle Chinese. Whoops, we talked about it yesterday. Right? Okay, so then you know, I talked about this yesterday as well, but and this is really what's treated in GUA's article. So 601 is when the Cheiyun is published, and then the Guanyu is published in, let's say, 1008. Between these two times, the kind of purpose of the book changes to a certain extent. So actually, I'm sure some of you know this, but the guy who wrote the Cheiyun has this, I don't know, very charming preface where he says that when he was a young man, he was at a drinking party with his father and his father's friends, and then they started talking about, you know, how to rhyme things, like I don't know, like I'm tempted to ask Josiah to say the thing you sleep on tied between two trees.
A cot.
Yeah, and then if you catch someone, you know.
You caught them.
Yeah, so you know, so for him those two things wouldn't rhyme, but for me they would. So this is the kind of thing you get into a fight with other people at a drinking party about, right? And then you know, this assiduous young man, he said, I am going to write down all of the verdicts of this drinking party, and it took him like 20 years or something, which I just find quite implausible, yeah. But there you go. So the purpose was really just to help people rhyme poetry correctly. But over time, you get more and more characters in, and more indications of the meaning. So it becomes more like a kind of general purpose dictionary, or like encyclopedia, if you like. And then there are these entries, and then they have the fǎnqiè glosses. Yeah, and they also for each character tell you whether it has another pronunciation. And then you can also find the character in principle in that other place in the book. Okay, so yeah, so the point here is just like what kind of information is in the rhyme books and the rhyme tables. So the rhyme books explicitly, I talked about yesterday, they have like these characters are homophones, yeah, and then these characters share the same rhyme, and that's it. So there's no information explicitly in the book about initials or medials or whatnot, although you can extract some of that from the fǎnqiè. Whereas in the rhyme tables, they tell us the initials and maybe the medials if the ranks are the medials, then yeah, but it gives much more explicit phonological information, and that's why they're used kind of together, right? Even though they're from several hundred years apart. The rhyme books have these abstract categories, like these words are pronounced the same, but you don't know how they're pronounced. These words have the same rhyme, but you don't know how that rhyme is pronounced. And there's no information explicitly about initials. So it's only with the rhyme tables that you get this explicit, like these words start with a D. Yeah. Okay. Certainly by the time of the Cheiyun, most morphemes in Chinese are monosyllabic and are then written by a character. So something like "is" here, you know, it's one character, it's one morpheme, it's one word, yeah. And then there are words like spider here that you can't refer to a spider with just one of the others, yeah. But actually, the dictionaries are not very good at theorizing the stuff. They just say, like, you know, they still give a gloss to individual characters, even when that's not correct in terms of morphological analysis. But in any case, yeah. So the Chinese writing system is monosyllabic. Okay, so now let's just talk about how we talk about the internal structure of a syllable. Yeah. So this is I don't know when. So yun, yeah. Okay. So the initial is M. The medial. We're a little bit on shaky ground here, but let's say the way it looks right now is the medial is ya, and then the main vowel is u, and then the coda is and then the tone is yeah. So it's a high tone, yeah. And we'll get more explicitly to this notation in a little while, yeah. So we can, if you like this kind of thing, you can use these letters for it, and then you can say that a Middle Chinese syllable is vet, yeah.
I'm vet.
And then this, and I think some of this is just normal phonological terminology, right? Especially when talking about Chinese. Yeah. So the onset is the initial and the medial. The coda is the ending. Yeah. The rhyme is the vowel and the ending, and then the final is the medial, the vowel and the ending. And then this, this is Yunhua says that a rhyme usually includes more than the rhyme without the H. But I would say let's avoid using the RH word rhyme in any strictly phonological context and keep it for poetic practice. That's my suggestion. Okay. Yeah, so now I ask you to look at these words, and I don't know, maybe you can talk to the classmate next to you and you can agree on, so for instance, in this word change, what is the initial, what is the medial, what is the rhyme, yeah? Just take a few seconds. You can do it in your head or on a piece of paper, yeah? Okay, who wants to do the second one? I'll say, is the H the medial?
That would be
Yeah.
The initial is TH for the aspirated the vowel is A, and the coda is
And what's the tone?
There is the first, it's like the first pinyin tone, which is not marked in the orthography.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll skip that one, we looked at yesterday. But now let's, this is just to introduce those who don't know Baxter's system so well. In general, Baxter's system is meant to be, it's using Roman letters, and meant to be, you can more or less read it off. The one thing you should notice is that the J makes the Y sound and not the J sound, right? So if you see, oops, I should back up one more. If you say this is pian and it's not jian. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so there are 4 tones in Middle Chinese, and I think it's good to just remind ourselves sort of what is the ontological, no, what is the sort of like when we say something's Pingsheng, what do we actually mean? We mean it is in the Pingsheng volume of the Cheiyun, right? Because the Cheiyun is the source we're using, and it gives us the tone explicitly. So in Middle Chinese, we have these 4 tones. Pingsheng, Shangsheng, Zhusheng, and Rusheng. And then this is the conventional, translations. And then departing and entering, are not very obvious phonological terms. But that's what they call them. Yeah. And actually, why did they call them? Oh, we didn't put the Middle Chinese in here. They're each what's acrophonic, I think is the word. I don't remember, but it is an example of the category that it is. Yeah. So, you know, so Ru is Rusha and so on. And that's more clear if we wrote them in Baxter's system, but okay. And then I touched on this last time, but now in a little bit more detail. So Middle Chinese had a distinction between voiced and voiceless onsets, whereas, for instance, Mandarin Chinese doesn't, right? And then in general, most Chinese varieties are affected by a tonal split kind of after the Middle Chinese period, where in the usual fashion, the initial voiced leads to a lower tone and the voiceless initial leads to a higher tone. So then we call it Ying after the voiceless and Yang after the voiced. And then we can have sort of 8 tones. And they really use this kind of terminology, this A, B, C, D, A1, B2 thing in Incredai, yeah. Yeah, Incredai. And actually, I would say like this kind of style of tonogenesis, both moments of it, like start with 4 tones that come from segmental stuff. Yeah, take segmental stuff, turn it into 4 tones, then have a tonal split based on initials. Kind of happened throughout all of Asia, right? So in a way in Burmese, in a way in lots of Tibetan, in all over Thailand. So somehow it was just the style in whatever 800 AD Asia to have this kind of tone system. So then actually the terminology can be useful, you know, even outside of talking about Chinese. Okay. So yeah, so then Chinese dialects in general can have or let's say diachronically speaking, in general have 8 tones, yeah? And then you can have mergers within those, or you can have further splits with other conditioning. But this I'll say, you know, whether it's good practice or not is another question, but when people analyze Chinese, modern Chinese dialects, it's always from the lens of Middle Chinese. So here is an example from Mandarin, which is particularly messy, yeah, I would say. So we have these, and actually I'll say, I mean, it's a coincidence, effectively it's a coincidence that Mandarin has 4 tones and Middle Chinese has 4 tones. The mapping between the 4 tones of Middle Chinese and the 4 tones of Mandarin Chinese is extremely messy. So here it is, you know. And in particular, you'll notice, well, here, let's go through it. So Middle Chinese tone A split into Mandarin tone 1 and tone 2, Middle Chinese tone B2 merged with tone C, and then Mandarin lost stop final consonants and then had to, you know, this sounds too teleological, but had to put those somewhere else, yeah. And if you if you go to conferences about Chinese linguistics narrowly, not Sino-Tibetan or whatnot, I would say there are 3 topics that get talked about to death. One is le, one is ba, and one is what happened to the Rusha. Okay, so now let's look at back at fǎnqiè. So and you can think about this as, you know, if you have Chinese characters and you want to tell someone how something is pronounced, how do you do it? Because you don't have an alphabet, right? So you can't say like, oh, bake is B-A-K-E, right? And then someone will say, actually, that should be bake, but anyhow. But here's how you do it. You say dong is de plus hong, and then you take the de from the de and the ong from the hong, and then you get dong. Yeah. And then this is it in Middle Chinese. And I'll just say it's not a coincidence that I'm starting with East, because East is the first character in the book. Yeah. Which is actually, like, it should have been Tian, the first character, right? But, yeah. So there we go. So fǎnqiè only, how can I say, this system relies on the synchronic phonology of a particular moment, right? like you know, like take Josiah, he makes this distinction between these two words that I can't even hear the difference between. So certain fǎnqiè in my dialect would work that wouldn't work in his dialect. Right? And actually, like a lot of stuff in dictionaries in general is erroneous because it was made up ex post facto based on fǎnqiè. So this is particularly people say about the Sino-Japanese readings that you know, someone says, "Oh, how do I pronounce this character?" Then they just look it up in the Cheiyun, and then they use the fǎnqiè that's in the Cheiyun in their own dialect, and then they get the answer of how to pronounce that character. So that, you know, is, and then those readings can then, you know, live on after that. So we have to be very careful in historical linguistics to actually check, you know, philologically speaking, how old are particular readings, and treat the fǎnqiè from a particular period as only relevant to that period. Now the sources don't help with this because in general, when Chinese lexicographers write dictionaries, they take over all the fǎnqiè readings from before. So you get sort of this sort of layers and layers of fǎnqiè, which is why if you look at like a later book like the Jinqi, it's just like every character has like 50 different pronunciations. It's because they're trying to be very systematic about collecting all the fǎnqiè that they've ever found anywhere, right? Okay, so that's okay. So yeah, this is just, you know, say even with fǎnqiè, we're only getting categorical information, right? We know that if we look at these characters, we know that this character has the same initial as this character. So this one has the same initial as this one. This one has the same rhyme, let's call it, as this one. But from the source, there's still no information about how to pronounce it. So we just, like traditional Chinese historical phonology is basically just this very articulated kind of equivalence relationships or like subset relationships of totally empty categories. Right. So now we look at kind of Baxter's system, which for those of us who, I think for everyone actually, especially for those of us who weren't trained up in the Chinese philological tradition, is easier to look at than, well, I should have had here, there is a way in Chinese of indicating the pronunciation of something where you use 6 characters and you just specify it has this initial, this medial, this rhyme, you know, in those different positions, this tone, and then these 6-character code can tell you how to pronounce the first character. But what Baxter has tried to do is to basically find a way of writing Middle Chinese in Roman letters that is kind of information theoretically identical to that 6-character system, but is, you know, easier to look at and gives you at least some idea of how it's pronounced. Now, Baxter in 1992 really wanted to make a kind of, I mean, computer-friendly, but actually really typewriter-friendly way of writing Middle Chinese. And I would say this is a reaction somehow to Calvin, where Calvin really liked diacritics. So, you know, he thought like, why put the letter A when you could put the letter A with a dot below it and a circumflex above it or something. And actually that, just a sort of historical detail, his system of, that is, say, Bernard Corwin's system of writing stuff comes from the tradition of Swedish dialectology, because he was a Swede and trained first in Swedish dialectology, and then he went to China and did Chinese dialectology. So he uses a sort of, you know, probably, if you like, late 19th century Swedish dialectological tradition for writing phonetics. And then he was, I mean, famously thought the phoneme was just sort of some crazy newfangled American thing that he wanted to have nothing to do with. Yeah. So anyhow, Baxter is kind of reacting to that. It's like, how about we write Middle Chinese in a way that's easy to look at? So using, for instance, an apostrophe rather than a glottal stop. And then there is a sort of, I don't know how to put it. Baxter himself says he's not reconstructing anything. You can treat this as just algebra. This is, you know, all that the apostrophe means is that it's this, you know, in the 36 initial system, it's that one. You know, it's like apostrophe means that character is what Baxter would say. But then other people said, no, come on, we know you think it's a glottal stop. Yeah. But you have to be on guard, especially about this use of O. Yeah. Because most of us see O and we think it's something like or, yeah, but it's not, it's yeah. And this is because, you know, upside down V is not a very easy thing to type in your typewriter. And he didn't need the O, like there is no O vowel in Middle Chinese. So the character O was free. So he used the upside down. So use the O for the upside down V. A lot of this is, I would say, one of the 2 points that people find most confusing in Baxter's Middle Chinese system. And I would say it's especially confusing because in Old Chinese, O means O. Yeah. Now I will just, I'm not sure I can remember where I saw it. No, it must have been his collected works, but Leonard Bloomfield, at least on one occasion, also used the letter O for meaning this sound. And I presume it's just coincidence that you know, Baxter ended up doing the same thing. But actually, Bloomfield was in the moment where he did that, he was also saying, like, look, you know, the relationship, as we all know from Days of Sword, the relationship between sound and writing is arbitrary. So I get to do whatever I want. Yeah. But I mean, let's say I've sort of developed my own way of writing Middle Chinese because, you know, we all have to do that as part of growing up. Yeah. But the nice thing about Baxter's system is it is relatively well established as a at least in a certain school of Chinese historical linguistics, it's relatively well established. So probably even if you don't like the O or the H, is the other one people don't like, just try not to let it bother you. Yeah. Yeah. I already said that it's you know, Baxter insists you can think, for instance, that the J wasn't really a medial glide, yeah, and still use his system. Yeah. Okay, and then we will say that kind of for the reason, or because Baxter doesn't regard himself as reconstructing anything, but rather just transliterating information that's already in the primary sources, we don't put an asterisk in front of Middle Chinese. So yeah, so put Middle Chinese in italics and no asterisks, and then put Old Chinese in not italics with an asterisk. The italics is kind of less of a big deal. If you want to italicize Old Chinese, I'm not going to stop you. But do put the asterisks with Old Chinese, because Old Chinese is clearly reconstructed, even if not using the comparative method. I just mentioned actually that, like, the asterisk, this star, what exactly does it mean? Does it mean unattested? Does it mean reconstructed? There's actually a nice article by, is it, who's founded Diachronica? Kruger or anyhow, there's this German who worked a lot on history of linguistics, and he has a very nice article about the history of the asterisks, and I can send it to you if you want. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so in 1992, Baxter used the epsilon and the a, you know, from Old English, the a and e stuck together, and he also used the bar I. And I was talking to him once, and he said that, you know, Mouton just required that. Basically, there were some reviewers who said, you know, he can't possibly not use some IPA symbols. so they sort of forced him to, despite his intention. So in the more recent book, and in general in their work after 1992, they write AE and they write EA instead of epsilon, and they write plus instead of barred I. And I think we'll get to this, but I think the plus in particular is infelicitous. It confuses your computer for one.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, now we get to see how they are acrophonic, right? So here are the tones. So ping sheng is marked with nothing, shang sheng is marked with an X, chu sheng is marked with an H, and then ru sheng is marked with a final stop. Yeah, and then you see that each one is an example of the tone that it is. Yeah. And then of course with ru sheng, it could be K, P, or T. Yeah. And then this has to do with Audricourt's idea of where these tones came from. So the H comes from an S, and the X comes from a glottal stop, and that somehow the H and the X are kind of remind you of that while still being sort of abstract symbols, so they indicate tone. And I think in 1992 he wrote them small, like small capital H and small capital X, but that's also something that now they write them, simpler. Yeah. Okay. And then here are the initials, which I'm not going to, go through entirely, but what you have here is the Chinese name, so let's just say Jin, right? So, in talking about Chinese linguistics, if you want to say K, you don't say K, you say Jianmu, Jianmu. Yeah. And the one way you can tell whether your students are using AI to cheat is that then they will say something like the seeing eye, yeah, yeah, where they should say K. Yeah. So yeah, so these characters are the traditional terms from the rhyme table tradition, and then this is how Baxter writes them, and then it's a nice, well, not quite like, it's not quite the order we would do from Sanskrit, but it's that kind of, kakagana, chachajana, anyhow, it's familiar to anyone with a linguistics background, what's going on here, right? And then a few little idiosyncrasies. This is, I'm explaining now Baxter's system, right? Is the actual sort of documents have this U, and they don't distinguish, but later in the study of the fǎnqiè chains in the Cheiyuan, it was decided we actually had two different ones, this I and this Un, or the U san and the U se. So Baxter writes it differently. So he writes the one as a Y and the one as an HY. Yeah. And then there's this other H, which is the sha. And the sha, so the sha and the un are in complementary distribution. So it's okay, right? Because he just writes HJ, it just means the H in the division 3, right? So now I think one thing that's already sort of confusing to me, and was certainly confusing when I wrote my book, is that these two are in complementary distribution, and these two are in complementary distribution. So there is a phonological problem in terms of how you analyze, the phonemes of Middle Chinese, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of reconstruction. And in terms of Baxter's system, it's clear enough. One is a Y, one is an H, and one is an HJ. Okay, and then, and this is one thing that I find a little infelicitous, is division 3, and let's say for current purposes, because we haven't quite gotten to the niceties, you can just say a medial probably, that is marked by putting characters in the third row of a rhyme table. So rank 3, if you like. He writes in several ways. So an initial Y or a medial J. Yeah. Yeah. So or basically, if there's a Y or a J anywhere, yeah, then it's a division 3 word. So let's just go through it carefully. So in SY, that means it's division 3. It also means it's sh. Right? So it's not su, it's sh. And then also with these palatals, like TSY is ch, but it also means it's division 3. Right? So and the fact is the palables only occur in division 3, right? So he's finding a kind of convenient way of writing that, but it would have been more consistent if he had actually written like TSY JANG, because then you would be saying it's a palatal initial in a division 3 rhyme. Yeah, but he sort of thinks that would be ugly. Yeah, and I think like, well, it's already not gorgeous. Yeah, and it makes the system like it makes you have to kind of be on your toes, right? Because Y means division 3 and palatalization, and J means division 3. But you need to remember both. Yeah, and you never get a Y followed by a J. And if you're doing fǎnqiè chains yourself, you have to remember to take out the J's when they're after a Y. Yeah, I feel like some of you are not totally on board with this, but yeah, just say division 3. So we're going to talk now about the divisions, yeah, and we're still just talking about idiosyncrasies of how Baxter writes Middle Chinese, and he writes division 3 in principle with a J, but palatal initials are all division 3, so he doesn't write the J with palatal initials because the Y is already there. Yeah, okay. And then R means retroflex. And this is actually another point that I find confusing, because R in Old Chinese means R, but R in Middle Chinese means retroflex. And it's just that he doesn't want to put a dot under the T, because you can't do that with a typewriter. Yeah. So yeah, so that's basically the principles for his spelling system there. And then let's look at the vowels. So these are the vowels: a, e, I, o, u, a, e, and u. And yes, this is where you see in the 1992 version, the A, E were written together, and rather than the EA, you had a epsilon, and rather than the plus, you had a barred I. And the plus confuses computers because it thinks it's a plus rather than a vowel. Yeah. And then for the codas, M, N, N, G, P, T, and K. And then for the velar codas, you can sometimes have a W in front of them. Okay. Now, let's talk about the divisions. And here I'm following this Shen Zhongwei's kind of analysis, where we have this I mean, I'm not even quite sure how to say it, but some kind of food or something.
Yeah, that's just the consonant version of that vowel.
Yeah, but how do you like say for me?
It's just like blah, blah,
Blah.
we.
It sounds like a W to me.
No, without rounding.
Without rounding. Okay, yeah, right. So, so these are we still haven't talked about the relationship, how we get from ranks to divisions, but we're talking about divisions now. So there are 4 divisions, and let's do them in order actually. So division 1 has front vowels, in particular the vowel e and no medial. Yeah. And now I'm not making claims about reality. I'm just telling you how Baxter writes it. Yeah. And then division 2, well, we are understanding to have this medial, which actually Baxter uses the AE or the EA vowel for. And then division 3 has this medial, the ya, or this one. Yeah, this is if we're understanding the divisions as representing medials, which is what Shen Zhongwei does, but it is controversial, I would say. And then 1, where did division 1 go? No, sorry, division.
The second.
Yeah. Division. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. Division 1 is basically no nonsense. Yeah, there's no medial and there's no front vowel. So it's the most basic one. Okay, now we finally get to the ranks in relationship to the divisions. So that question, what's the relationship between the ranks and divisions, is basically the same thing as the Chongyu problem. Yeah, and I will try to explain this, but I would say this, you know, like someone can do a better job than I can, and it's tricky, and it's one of these things where the moment I'm not teaching it, I forget about some of the details. But let's just remind ourselves that in the rhyme books, there are these homophone groups, yeah? So that's the thing to start with, is the book itself says, these characters are homophones, and these characters are homophones, and double button or repeated button is when there are two homophone groups, which means they mustn't have been pronounced the same, right? Because if they were pronounced the same, they would have been one homophone group. But where it's very hard, given the sources, to tell how they were different. They're in the same rhyme group, and the fǎnqiè chains link them. So the question is, how are they different? Well, they only occur with grave initials. And so grave means at the front or the back of the mouth. So basically P or K, but not like T, yeah? And that's just a fact, like, you know, there are these homophone groups that are hard to pull apart using the original sources. And it turns out that the characters in them that are in the rhyme tables, or that are linked via fǎnqiè chains to things in the rhyme tables where we know what the initial is, are either at the front or the back of the mouth. They both have division 3 finals. What does that mean? That means that the fǎnqiè chains that characterize their finals are, you know, overwhelmingly linked to characters that are division 3 in the Yunjing. Yeah, but then and then we come to the point at the bottom here, which is that typically, well, they come in pairs, right? Because we were saying there are two homophone groups, yeah? One will be put in rank 4, and one will be put in rank 3. So, yeah, I just want to kind of review that again, because it's all about, we don't know, you know, we're trying to remain agnostic, if you like, what on earth this phonetic difference was. But there are two sets of homophones that we know are somehow different. We know they have grave initials. We know they're in the same rhyme in terms of the rhyme book. That rhyme is mostly a division 3 rhyme. But then if you find one character from one rhyme group, from one homophone group, and one character from the other phone group in the Yunjing, one of them will be division 4, and one of them will be division 3. Yeah.
Right.
Rank, yes, that's exactly why we came up with the term rank, was to make that distinction. So they're all division 3 in the sense that the rhyme category they're in generally is characterized by rank 3 readings. Yeah, that's what we mean by them being division 3, is which rhyme category they're in. But then in terms of the characters in the specific homophone group, one will be rank 3 and one will be rank 4. Okay, that's what the Chongyu distinction is, and you're like, why do I care? Well, this is, let's say, the one thing, I guess, that we don't really have a good way of getting a phonetic grasp on, starting with the rhyme tables. Yeah. So like the rhyme tables tell you, oh, this initial is P, or it's this rhyme or something. But here, neither from the initial, neither from the rhyme can we sort of characterize what this phonetic difference is. Now, in Sino-Vietnamese and in Papa, there is a difference. So some people sometimes think this is like some kind of artificial difference. Most Sinitic languages don't distinguish it, but I think there are some, yeah.
And actually, in Beijing, they have this A and B difference.
Well, okay, there you go. Yeah. Right, so now back to just how Baxter writes it. Then this is the sort of most technical part of Baxter writing, yeah, that in rank 3 words, so Chongyu rank 3 words are spelled with J or with I, but not both, yeah. And rank 4 words are spelled with both J and I. So, you know, I sort of promised not to write on the board, but I will anyhow. So if you just see Pierre, sorry, if you see P or you see Pierre, these are division 3 words, right? But they're division 3 words, and if they're in the Yunjing, there will also be rank 3. Right? But this is a division 3 rank 4 word, yeah. And you can understand that it's just purely artificial orthographic convention on Baxter's part. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, and then I sort of have already gone through this, but let's do it. So division 1, whoops, contains a or o or u, but not e, and no preceding j. So you have things like pung and pun and tung. And then division 2 has ae or ea with no preceding j. So you have things like hyun, hin, and back, and cha. Yeah. I'm not a phonetician. And then the division 3 either has an I or a J or a Y somewhere. So here you have Chin, Jiang, Piang, yeah, and so on. Yeah. And then division 4 has the vowel E with no preceding Y or J. It's also very arbitrary, doesn't it? But that's the way he, let's say, if you're already comfortable with this terminology, this ER, Sam, and Sedong, then this is how you write it in Baxter's system. Yeah. And if you're not, then frankly, you can just take it as it comes, right? You can just say Baxter's system is whatever Baxter's system is, and I can look up characters in a spreadsheet and have the Baxter spelling next to it. And actually, this is maybe another thing that you might want to get your hands on. There's a nice spreadsheet that has 9,000 characters in Baxter's Middle Chinese, and I'm sure some of the people here have it. So maybe ask your friend for that spreadsheet, and then if you don't have any friends, you can ask me. Yeah. Okay, so that was it with Middle Chinese, and now I can at least make a stab at the Chinese script and the phonetic information contained in it. And I think that kind of what we're doing is we're sneaking up on Old Chinese here, where one of the ways we sneak up on Old Chinese, one of the sources of information for reconstructing Old Chinese is Middle Chinese. Yeah? In the same way that if you're, I don't know, reconstructing Proto-Germanic, you might want to start with Old High German. Yeah. And then another source is the phonetic information implied by the Chinese script itself. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So I skipped the review because we just had it. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, Chinese generally has characters and some punctuation marks. And yeah, and then let's look at some character. Here are some characters. And they have the same rhyme, but notice, we're just going to notice that this character is inside this character, right? So maybe it's not a coincidence that they have the same rhyme and that one is inside the other one, yeah. And then just say that this, just say Chinese is their logographs is something you hear them called. Like it's like, I mean, at least in today's form of the script, like generally speaking, one character represents one morpheme, and it's not strictly speaking true, but you can say it's like a syllabary with a ton of redundancy. Yeah. As opposed to an alphabet where lower level segments will be specified, or a syllabary like in Japanese, where every time you have that syllable, you write that same symbol. Okay. And yeah, most characters have subcomponents, and usually one of those subcomponents tells you something about the pronunciation, as we see in that in the word for red, it contains the word officer, or it contains the symbol for officer, and that's telling you something about the pronunciation, and it might be telling you, if you know lots of words for red, remember this is the one that sort of sounds like officer. Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at the history of Chinese writing. So Chinese is written from sort of middle, so let's say 1250 BCE, during the reign of Wu Ding, and it's written on turtle plastrons or sheep scapulae. And I will also say that the practice of using animal bones to ask some kind of super mundane beings about things you want to know the answer to is much older than the script. Yeah, so basically the whole Shang dynasty, they had been doing what we call pyromancy. But in 1250, they start writing on them. Yeah. And then I might as well just be controversial here and say, I think that it's not a coincidence that the horse and chariot and riding appeared at exactly the same time. And that it may well be under foreign influence. Because remember that the Sumerians had already been writing for 2,000 years by then, and there was only one intermediate civilization in 1250 BC between the Chinese and sort of the ancient Near East, and those were Indo-Aryan speakers who clearly themselves didn't write; they didn't have any need for it. But the Chinese had managed to get quite a state-like state with temples and slaves and pottery and things. Without writing, but then I think they were at a moment where writing was a really useful technology, and their neighbors, yeah.
So are you saying that probably somebody who had been or who had heard of the Near East, like knew about the concept of representing sound with symbols?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think that I don't think that Chinese is like an adaptation of Sumerian, but I think like basically there were let's say like Indo-Aryan speakers. Kind of in all of the territory between China and the ancient Near East at the time. And I think of someone like the Mitannis, and all you need is one sort of Indo-Aryan to say, oh, you Chinese, you're like the Sumerians, you've got slaves and temples and a government, but you don't have that writing thing that they have. And then they're like, well, what is this writing? It's, you like make a little picture of a horse. I mean, horse. Oh, that's a good idea.
There's also like Longshan symbols that look really similar.
Yeah, let's say the conventional wisdom, I think, in China is that Chinese culture is 5,000 years old, and they've always had writing. Yeah. But I think it's clear that something happened in 1250 BCE, and like, yeah, of course, people have been like drawing pictures of dogs for a long time. Yeah, but I think that or one thing that's very interesting, and some people say it's just lack of archaeological record, is in Sumeria, and I won't go into the details now. There's like let's say about a 5-step process between drawing pictures of dogs to having a script. Yeah, and each of those moments in the development of writing is documented. So it's clear that inventing writing is an extremely torturous process that takes hundreds of years. And sort of, you have to have this before you do this. Whereas in China, it's like a light went off and suddenly they've got writing. And so that suggests to me that there's some kind of contact with foreigners. Yeah.
I mean, like, isn't like the conventional explanation, it's just that the older forms of writing were just written on perishable materials. I think the usual explanation they give is that it was written on bamboo slips, and we only have bamboo slips since like the late Warring States period. So maybe there could be a huge corpus of Chinese writing from the Chinese that we just don't have access to, but there are lots of.
Yeah. That's the conventional thing to say. But then I would say, like, why weren't they writing on sheep scapula and turtle plastrons in 1300 BC if they had writing? Like, it's basically it's borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, right? Like, something happened in 1250, and maybe it was just suddenly they were like, oh, we could also write on bone. Yeah, but I mean.
I mean, unless we invent a time traveling machine, I guess we never know.
Yeah, but in general, it's bad. In general, it's considered bad practice to argue from silence, right? And then also, I would say, you expect there to be a little bit of graffiti here and there. Like usually, if a civilization has writing, they will be writing on stone and durable things. But anyhow, I don't want to controversialize more than I already have. Here are some, just this is like, for many of you, this will be kind of, you got it with your mother's milk, but you see, there's a tiger, and it goes from looking like a tiger to looking less like a tiger. And the same with a dog and an ox. And part of this, I mean, this happens in any script that starts as pictorial, generally speaking, which is people, want to, like, either the surface itself sort of says, please don't spend all day making a beautiful picture of a tiger, or it's that you want to write faster, right? So you could get these things more, they lose their pictorial quality as they become more, conventionalized. Yeah. Okay, but how do you write abstract concepts like above, come, and read? Yeah, or grammatical elements like a modal particle? Yeah, it's very hard to draw a realistic picture of the meaning of a modal particle. So this is the so-called rebus principle, which is at play in all early writing systems. And I always use the example of, you want to write a letter to your mother, and you say, oh, dear mother, and you think, how do I write dear? And then you think, I know, I'll make a picture of a deer. Yeah. Even though it doesn't mean that there, right? So that's the rebus principle. When you use a pictograph or other non-phonetic representational graph for its sound value alone. Boltz has this nice thing where he says like a grapheme has a plus P and a plus S. Like, that's its pronunciation and its semantics. And then you kind of turn off one of the two. You say, okay, I'm turning off the S and now I'm using it only for its phonetic value, or I'm turning off the P and I'm using it only for its semantic value, which also happens where, like, actually, here's a good example. The word woman, nu has kind of two readings in Jaguan. One is something like na, and one is something like on, right? And probably they, like, which is say you can turn off the phonetics in order to use a semantic for a different word with similar semantics but different pronunciation, like you can use nu to write on, but you can also use, and then the other example is moon, right? You can use yue to write ming or something like that. But the more common is you turn off the semantics in order to get basically like a syllabary, right? So then you're using deer, the animal, to mean deer, the whatever deer, dear to my heart. Yeah. Actually, I'll just point out that in German, teuer or teuer means it's cardinal with deer, and it can also, like, in English you can also say to buy cheap and to sell dear, right? So anyhow, here's Middle Chinese gi, and it has all these meanings, yeah. And then you see how we do this, where we have originally it's a basket, which is not listed here, I think, but it's a basket, and then you use it for the modal particle, and then you say, okay, well, I'll put the jade next to it to mean I mean the pronunciation gi that refers to jade, and you put some horse next to it, meaning I'm the gi that refers to horse. So this is like if I put a heart next to the deer and say like, okay, I mean the sound deer with the meaning, you know, dear mother, yeah. Okay, and then this rebus principle is a way of generating character. So then you can have a character for everything. And that's when we really have a writing system, right? It's like very early writing systems. And this is definitely true in Sumeria, right? All you can say is like 1 ton barley, yeah, or you know, lots of goats or something. And then if you actually want to be able to talk about philosophy or something, you have to invent a lot of new characters, and then you have a whole writing system. And I think I'll skip this slide. Basically, there's lots of, you know, there's conventional terms for the script at different moments, but Jinqi will cover this more next week, and I'm running out of time, so I'll skip it. And instead, go straight to so-called Shesheng series, which I've already kind of put the, you know, put the machinery in place for, and these are 2 articles, you can read about them. So let's just look at, you know, this word mother. So the word mother, ma, is composed of the left, which is nu, and that means woman, and the right, which is ma, which means horse, right? So mother is the thing that sounds like a horse and has to do with a woman, yeah. I'll skip that too. So then let's look at the Shesheng series. So this is a series of all characters that have the same phonetic component. So here we have horse, and we have, I don't know what these words mean, but you have the horse and the spiritual horse, and then the net related horse, yeah. And they are all pronounced ma, you know, ma, like, ah. It's a nice American sound, right? Ma. So one's ma and one's ma. Okay, so if you look at this, you say, what does it, this is the question we're asking ourselves, what does it mean that 2 characters are written with the same phonetic? Well, looking at this series, you would say, it means that they're the same except for their tone, right? That's, I'm being very empirical here. I'm saying, we look at an example, we say, oh, if 2 characters have the same phonetic, it means that their pronunciation in Middle Chinese is the same except for their tone. We're using Middle Chinese here because we have to start with something, right? Okay, so they don't tell us about tone, and maybe they do tell us about rhyme and initial. But now let's look at this series, and we see, oh, our theory didn't quite work, because here is a series with, so these all have the same phonetic, but we have yeah, and we also have pie, and we also have pie. So clearly, at least, you know, who knows what was going on in Old Chinese, but in Middle Chinese, 2 characters can be written the same way if they have a homoorganic initial, because these are all bilabials, yeah? And what can we say about their rhyme? Well, they're kind of not so different, like none of them ends with a K, yeah? But there definitely are 2 rhymes, one a and one yeah, right? So now let's try to just generalize this. So we have 3 initials, B, P, and PH, and then 2 finals, A and yeah. Yeah.
Well, fronting of a to a in the environment of a like palatal glide is really common, so maybe those were actually ya.
No, but yeah exists.
Oh, the ya exists.
Yeah, exists.
Well, I mean,
Maybe it was a.
you're on the right track, which is we could speculate that they were once the same, yeah, but don't jump ahead, right? Okay, now we can say, oh, here, look, this is a passage in the Ode. On the lamb furs 5 many tresses of white silk. By the shore of that march there are sedges and lotus plants. And then you notice there's a rhyme here
between two characters that are in the same series, yeah? So now we can sort of speculate, maybe it's a rule, right? Actually, there's something, I don't want to talk too much about the philosophy of science, especially because I only have 1 minute yet left. But Baxter and Cigar are real believers in, or at least they say they are, real believers in Karl Popper and the hypothetical deductive method, where you come up with a theory and it might just be, you know, a demon possesses you and now you have a theory, and then you try to falsify it, yeah? And I think that this is exactly the opposite of how science actually works. So I have something I call the inducto-dogmatic method, yeah? And in the inducto-dogmatic method, I see something like two characters that share the same phonetic rhyme, which is just a fact. It's like, it's a fact I've noticed in the world. And then I turn it into a dogma, and I say, all things in the same phonetic series must rhyme. Yeah? And that process of changing an inductive generalization into an article of faith is actually how science progresses. And then you try to hold on to that dogma as long as you can, given, you know, other things you see. So we're going to do that now, and we'll call it the, you know, so actually I would prefer if we call it the Sheshong dogma instead of the Sheshong hypothesis, because hypothesis makes it sound like we're going to try and falsify it. And that's not what we're going to try to do. We're going to try and cling to it at all costs. Yeah. So Duan Yucai says, if there is this thing at the bottom, if characters that share the same component write words that would have rhymed in the language of the Churching. And actually you can see that it's unfalsifiable because a lot of words aren't written in the Churching. Yeah. And then Li Fenghui added that their initials have the same point of articulation, which is to say they're homoorganic. Yeah. So that's the Sheshong hypothesis, and I'll stop there. Yeah, and that is, I would say that's like that is the core dogma, if you like, of Chinese historical phonology. Is if two things have the same phonetic, then they would have had homoorganic initials, and they would have rhymed the Shishing. And then a lot of how we do research in Chinese historical phonology is we find situations where prima facie that's not the case, and then we try and come up with some crazy explanation for how we can make it the case. Yeah. All right. So now I'm out of time, so I will stop talking.